What's going on, guys? Evan the Dark Souls 2's enthusiast here, bringing another Dark Souls 2 gameplay commentary. First one in a little bit. We'll talk a little bit about that, but in any event, this will be a gameplay of the Lost Bastile and related areas. This video will stop short just before Sinner's Rise, and we should get almost all the drops, I think, but before we get into that, I want to elaborate on what you're going to hear in this video so you can, tune in if you like it, tune out if you don't. So, things I'm hoping to cover, this video is shy of an hour, so sort of a longer upload. Hopefully we'll run out of things to talk about, right? But in any event, some things I've sort of pre-planned talking about are, I want to talk about some channel updates, why there was a little lapse in Dark Souls 2 videos, am I going AWOL again? If not, what am I doing? What's going on? Life updates, things like that. I want to talk about how some uploads are going to be changing, maybe trying something new here for a little bit, partly out of necessity and partly out of, preference. And I want to talk about the PC launch, which the PC came out today, the day this is being recorded. It might be uploaded the day after, I'm not sure yet, so we'll see what happens there. I want to talk about the standard builds I'm seeing in PvP, the standard builds I'm seeing in PvE, and what I think of those builds. I want to talk about a new mechanic I learned, which is elemental immunity. I don't know if you guys have heard about that, but I want to talk a bit about that, and I think if there's ramifications for the quote-unquote metagame. And I want to talk about some other games that are probably going to appear on this channel in the near future. So, a couple things, as is my custom, I will not be talking during boss fights, because I think it sort of detracts from watching the boss fight. Oh, and I also want to talk a little bit about speedruns. Not that I will be doing one, but things I've observed that sort of really change my take on the whole Dark Souls thing. So, lastly, as I was saying, I don't talk during the boss fights. I really don't think I really need to, especially not for Dark Souls 2, I don't really think I need to give a boss fight strategy. I'd be lying if I said I thought the boss fights in this game were fantastically done. I think Dark Souls 1 had better boss fights. In fact, Demon Souls probably also had better boss fights. But this isn't an anti-Dark Souls 2 video. This is a Dark Souls 2 video. I'm just saying, I typically have never talked during the boss fights in the Souls games unless I have a special occasion. I've never done boss strategy videos because basically the best strategies are to cheese a boss. So if you get stuck on a boss, you can always cheese it. And there's really no point in me putting up sort of a quote-unquote skillful fight against a boss because if people are looking for that, they could just see it themselves. So, anyway, it's been a while since we've had some Dark Souls 2 videos, a little over a week and a half, I think, probably by the time this gets uploaded. And that's for a variety of reasons. One is, I've talked about this before, I work in the university system in the United States. I'm a hall director more specifically, so, we're approaching May here at end of April, and as a result, I've had to work a lot on the weekends and get things ready for closing the building, meetings with students. In other words, I've just been really busy, and I just haven't had time to upload. And in the past, I used to try to upload come hell over high water, and it kind of turned this whole uploading to YouTube's thing a job, and I already had a job that requires anywhere from 45 to 55 hours a week, and even more than that during peak times in the year. So I just can't really afford to be working two jobs, particularly one that doesn't provide a whole lot of income. I mean, my YouTube income, it was basically non-existent. I mean, I could, they blow themselves up. I could essentially be, working at Walmart and making more in, 2 weeks of work than I make on YouTube. And that's not a complaint. I don't really put probably the time in that you need to get lots and lots of money off the YouTubes. So that's no problem. I appreciate everyone that sticks with the channel and watches my content. I'm averaging, 250 to 300 views per Dark Souls video, and that's more than enough for me. That makes me feel pretty good. I'd like to get the number up a little bit because, exposure is everything, and more exposure would mean more requests. I don't get a lot of viable requests from viewers at this time, so that might be a thing in the future, fan requests. So that's kind of what's going on with the channel. There is going to be a change in sort of the upload pattern, what that looks like. Not necessarily more or less, but just different. And I'm going to save that topic for after the boss fight here, so the fog's coming up ahead, and I'll catch you guys on the flip side. Alright, stick with me here. Alright, and that's a Rune Sentinels boss fight there. You know, they're not that hard. I think a lot of people struggle with them because it's sort of the 3 versus 1, you know. A lot of players struggle with multiple enemies on screen at once, and, you know, I can agree with that. The Dark Souls 2, and, you know, some other uploaders have pointed this out, Dark Souls 2 boss fights, one of the reasons I think they lack the charm and sophistication of the Dark Souls 1 boss fights is sometimes they're made challenging by just having multiple enemies. Whereas Ornstein and Smough was 2 enemies, but obviously, you know, that was sort of an iconic fight of the game and very well received by the fan base, whereas this game just tends to be a lot of multiple enemies without the intricacies of that fight. Instead, just a lot of, you know, mob you. That's kind of how the Rune Sentinels are. They just mob you. So, you know, unless you're using magic, you're basically forced to play very patiently and defensively and wait for openings, which, you know, kind of good practice for PvP in a way, because unless you're sort of a go ham kind of strategy, that's kind of how PvP works. But anyway, I want to talk about why the uploads will be changing. And, you know, so basically during the period of time when I wasn't uploading as frequently here in the last week and a half, I actually took some time to play extra Dark Souls 2 because I will be leaving university campus here in May to go to a summer program, which is kind of a mix of university classes coupled with, you know, icebreakers, team builders, summer activities kind of stuff, and it's like an outreach program kind of. That's a lot of things, and I don't want to elaborate on it too much because, you know, I doubt a lot of the viewers are interested in it, but it primarily serves Native students and, you know, Native American, and it's a good time. I find the work very rewarding, but the internet out there is, you know, kind of on the fringes of South Dakota, so we've got talking some pretty fail internet, so sometimes uploads can be a thing, and I don't have great upload speeds, and I have atrocious download speeds, so it's a problem, and thus I'm forced to do some interesting things to get footage. And also my PlayStation 3 is not making the trip out there with me. My desktop computer will, because I'm not going, you know, 3 months without a desktop, but you know, I wouldn't be able to finish that playthrough out there because I wouldn't have the PlayStation. I wouldn't want to end one series to jump onto another character, and it'd just be too weird. So anyway, I used that time to finish up my Dark Souls character, this playthrough. That way I have all the footage stored on a hard drive that'll go out there with me. I mean, I'll still have to, you know, put some commentary over it, but, you know, that'll be okay because I won't need the system out there to do that, of course. So that's my plan to go forward with that. Kind of with that, one of the, you know, unique challenges associated with it is, you know, doing commentary for your gameplay, you know, months after you've actually recorded it, where you're kind of forced to, you know, not call upon the things you're necessarily doing because you probably won't remember what you were doing at any particular time. Particularly not for me in Dark Souls 2, where I don't have everything memorized. I mean, sometimes I'm still in the process of like looking around trying to find things in areas, which slows me down in some of these playthroughs. But anyway, that will change the nature of my uploads, where they might be more binge oriented, where like for 2 weeks you'll get, you know, maybe 2 videos a day, and then for another week you might not get any videos at all, and it's just kind of the nature of the life out there. But I've got archival footage of this Dark Souls playthrough that I can finish. So unless we have a catastrophic hard drive failure, I'll have that footage available, which is what happened to a lot of my Demon Souls footage, was a catastrophic hard drive failure. So to finish the Demon Souls series, I basically have to go replay with a new character, and I don't know next time that'll happen. It's the original iteration of the Souls series, so I'd have to go through all these other Souls games. You know, I'd probably go back to Dark Souls 1 before I'm back to Demon Souls, but, you know, that's another conversation for another time. But so that's where my life is right now, and some things that'll be going on with me, some things that'll be changing. Probably won't be that noticeable for you guys, other than, like I said, more binge uploads, and not necessarily less content, but definitely probably less spacing on the content. But anyway, I want to take a chance here to talk about a couple things I've noticed about Dark Souls 2, and that's, you know, like I said, when you watch speed runs, you really get the opportunity to see really the best way to do things. Not necessarily the safest, but the quickest. And I find sometimes going for the quickest strategy is the most efficient strategy. And because I don't find a lot of the areas in Dark Souls 2 places that I kind of like to poke around in, I just like to complete them and move on to the preferred areas. You know, I think that there's definitely something to be said for, you know, playing a varied character. I think the days of having just one weapon on your character, or just one way of doing things, is kind of over. I think most players need to strongly consider branching off into magic, or, you know, branching off into mundane, which we'll talk a little bit about later. I mean, at this point, mundane's a completely new way to play Dark Souls, at least Dark Souls 2. But anyway, with that, it's kind of disappointing that in this game a lot of the classic, like, you know, Dragon's Tooth only builds don't work. I mean, of course, you know, skill can compensate for anything, but a lot of the areas are designed in such a way that you're better off having ranged attacks, you're better off having multiple options, and with that, if you are going to be sort of one weapon type and you're not going to, your only weapons, you're not going to use magic and things like that, I would argue that it's pretty critical that you have multiple weapons, because in Dark Souls 2, the difference, the damage types do to enemies is tremendous. I mean, like a mace's strike, and it's amazing how much extra damage strike does to certain kinds of enemies, and slashing does against some other things, and different damage types and things like that. So, you know, doing your research before boss fights and seeing what's effective against what boss, and, you know, what kind of things can poise or stagger them by breaking their poise. You know, these are all really important considerations, I think, when you're, you know, a weapon only type of build. So I think that, you know, you'll obviously have been invaded here, so you get to see some low-level PvP. Bell Covenant is typically not the place you go for the most skillful of opponents, and that's true for me as well. It's kind of the place I go when I'm getting my feet wet with a character, and I've probably done about 300 matches in the Bell Covenant before, so that's a thing. Kind of want to take a chance to talk about some of the standard builds I'm seeing for beating the well, first I just want to throw this out there, guys, real quick, that there will be Dark Souls content while I play. This guy thinks he's cheeky and drops behind me, but not really. It's kind of like he just didn't want me to fog gate him, I think, but ow, arrow. So, you know, why am I flasking? Well, I'd like to remind players there is a difference between a duel and an invasion. You won't see me flask in Dragon Brother fights or anything like that, but if I get invaded, and I'm not, you know, once again, it's one thing if I get invaded when I'm waiting to be invaded and I'm looking for some PvP. This is, I'm trying to get to the boss and I get invaded, and, you know, I'm not deliberately trying to trigger a fight. So this guy's using the double rapier poke strategy. Ooh, that dashing bash from the mace. Mace has like so much phantom rage, it's unbelievable. But anyway, as I was saying, you'll see we had some cut footage there, which was, you know, I finished that duel, then went back to Majula to, you know, take advantage of some things, and obviously we're at the timeline moment here at 1430 where I'm going to go get the Saint set. I have the requirements of, I think it's 30 or 35 faith to acquire the Saint set from the Miracle Seller here without actually killing her. So Saint armor, the Saint's armor is very powerful, and, you know, the things she gives me are useful. So I just did a quick detour and left the Lost Bastile to come grab this stuff, and got the chime and all that stuff, and, you know, now I will be pretty much well positioned to kill her later, because it's important that you get all the things from her that you want before you kill her, of course. And in New Game Plus, she's actually a very powerful NPC, so it's often best to do any kind of work you need to do with her, you know, in your first playthrough, especially if you plan to kill her, because that can be pretty challenging later. So now I want to take the chance to talk, like I was saying, some of the standard builds I'm observing in PvP, some of the standards builds I'm observing in PvE, and frankly there's not a whole lot of difference between the two, because typically the people that are quote-unquote doing a build where they're looking at their character progression and planning and being careful and things like that, that in my experience, that usually invites you know, PvP. If you're taking the time to plan your build, you're probably going to wind up PvPing eventually anyway, because you're enough into the Souls games to try things. And I think casual players, they just build their character however they want, or they go online and get a fundamental idea of how things work, then build from there. I mean, not everyone's a min-maxer, and, you know, there's definitely a huge variety of min-maxers. You know, when you min-max, you know, how much is too much, how little is too little. I mean, and what weapons do people like? I mean, I think in, you know, Dark Souls 2, as long as you're willing to sort of watch out for the parry, there's really no reason not to use the Santier Spear, but of course not everyone uses the Santier Spear. People use a variety of things just to experiment and see what they like. So, ordering the bell here, this will give me access to the Belfry Gargoyles, which are coming up here in, you know, less than a minute. And I'm not going to talk during that boss fight, so we'll take a quick pause here in a sec, and I will, when I return, we'll talk about some of the standard builds I'm seeing and what that looks like, and sort of the strengths and weaknesses I've observed from playing against them, not necessarily playing as them, because I haven't had time to make, you know, 10 different characters to try all the different sort of standard builds. It'll probably take me a year to try everything, because I don't bottomless box. But alright, so here's a quick break for the Belfry Gargoyles, and I'll catch you guys afterwards. that's the Bell Gargoyles, guys. Really challenging fight, I think, if you're melee only. I mean, of course, everyone struggles with different things, so sometimes some players just kind of fly through that fight. Other players have trouble with it. Pure melee, I had trouble with it because I just kind of get mobbed by so many gargoyles at one time. And like many boss fights, sadly, it comes down to a huge matter of patience. I mean, are you patient enough to wait it out? And I think it's interesting that this mist remains, so that if you're getting invaded there and you don't want to fight, you can just mist out. I think that's pretty interesting. So if you're trying to farm Black Phantoms there and you kind of get mobbed by a bunch of them, you can always do that. And I don't know why you'd want to farm Black Phantoms. You'd probably want to be a Black Phantom to do the farming of your Titanite chunks. But anyway, so something to consider. That's actually a pretty good thing for a lot of players to do, is join the Bell Covenant. That'll get you some early Titanite chunks through invasions, but that'll also give you a chance to practice PvP in probably the most casual PvP environment there is, and you don't have to worry about finding your own honor code and things like that. And I think that's a big part of PvP in the Souls games, because there is so few rules about how it runs that it really comes down to what your personal ethics are, from the completely dastardly attack you while you're bowing all the way to the bow, allow a free buff, and allow people to heal and not heal yourself. You know, huge gambit of experiences there, and it takes time for people to find their style. And I think that the Bell Covenant is generally considered a lawless region where you can do whatever you want. And, I definitely don't consider myself an honor in the Bell Covenant. I mean, I'll openly acknowledge I gank people. I use all the cheesy tactics. Anything it takes to sort of get my Titanite chunks and get my Covenant rewards. Although, I mean, the Bell Covenant armor kind of sucks and doesn't really look that amazing. It does look kind of Shakespearean, which is cute. Getting mobbed by all these dogs down here, and a spirit, like one of the more dangerous areas in the entire game. Oh, sorry about that, guys. My cell phone was not muted for this commentary. I'll correct that here in a couple seconds. There we go. My apologies. So without further ado, I'm going to jump in. We've got probably 20 minutes-ish, and that'll probably give me more than enough time to talk about the standard builds I'm observing and what that looks like. So let me jump into that here right quick. Also, I've kind of tinkered with the audio settings for this upload. I've basically had my voice louder than it typically is. Typically, I soften my voice a little bit because I've always felt like I have a pretty sharp voice. So if I get some feedback on that, if you guys like this louder audio setting, if you guys prefer sort of the dumbed down audio, let me know. Obviously the game audio is always turned down, but this is just my voice is louder. So I don't know. Let me know what you guys think of the audio setting. I always listen to it myself, but I guess my opinion is probably less meaningful than the people that are listening, because I don't get a whole lot of pleasure listening to myself other than for quote unquote content control. The Lost Bastile is one of those areas where I find it generally enjoyable to be in. A lot of the areas in Dark Souls 2, they're fine. I mean, there's very few, other than the gutter, there's really no area. Well, even the gutter's okay. No, it's not. Other than the whole Grave of Saints / gutter, Doors of Pharaohs, other than basically everything under Majula. I enjoy most of the areas in this game, but the Lost Bastile is one that I continually enjoy playing around in. Same with Drangleic Castle. There's a couple areas in this game that really stand out, and I enjoy the Tower of Flame, although really it's not much of an area. So kind of wish that I feel like some of the areas in this game didn't get as much love as others, which is to be expected in probably any kind of adventure action game, but adventure RPG, action RPG, I would have preferred to see some more polished areas. I mean, some of them are visually pretty hot, but on the flip side, not so fun to play in. Like, I figure the Shrine of Amana is one of the most cosmetically appealing areas in the game, but probably one of the least fun to play, especially if you're a melee-only character. Although post-mage nerfs, it's kind of a not challenging area at all anymore. Now it's just more of a hassle area with, wading through pitfalls of water. But anyway, getting onto these standard builds I keep alluding to, things I've observed. So this is by no means an exhaustive list. I mean, you could run into anything at any time, and this is just the things that I run into that I feel are very common, and I'll sort of do them in order of frequency and how I encounter them. So the most frequent thing I encounter by far, probably almost a 2 to 3 ratio in my experience, is magic. Just straight magic, soul spears, great soul arrows, soul vortex, soul geysers, crystal home and soul mast. You get the idea, you know, all the high-end magic with lots of attunement slots and lots of casting speed. That's what I encounter more than anything else. That coupled with, you know, typically the Moonlight Greatsword is, for me, overwhelmingly the most frequent int item I see with Crystal Magic Weapon, or formerly Crystal Magic Weapon. And, you know, most magic builds, obviously, Crystal Magic Weapon, whatever they're swinging at. So that's what I encounter more than anything else. Next most common thing I probably see is like Flame Longsword, just because I think it's something people get early in the game and it's fully upgraded and players don't necessarily change because there's really no need to beat the single player. So that is the most common build I encounter by far. Typically, if they even have a weapon, it's the Moonlight Greatsword, and if they don't have a weapon, it's just, you know, all the spell stacks of all the Soul Geysers and Soul Spears and Soul Vortexes and things like that. And the nature of how balanced that is has been up for debate in the community. I don't find Magic to be OP. I find it to be very viable and very powerful, but that's not necessarily a bad thing, because Magic was kind of a joke in some other Souls games. I mean, yeah, sometimes you get people and get the kill, but typically it was, you know, people would show up with Crystal Soul Spear and maybe get you with a lag shot or shoot you in the back in like a forced invasion in Dark Souls 1. So that's my experience with Magic. I don't see blue flames very often, but I see them, yeah, probably third most often. And I think if you are playing Magic, I personally think dual wielding the blue flame, power stancing it is probably your best bet after the Moonlight Greatsword nerf. But once again, that's of course a matter of opinion. People, you can use whatever they like, and I think people are most comfortable with the Moonlight Greatsword. You know, basic moveset, solid moveset, you know, energy waves and stuff like that. All around a great weapon. Pre-nerf, probably the best weapon for Magic outside of just casting outright. But post-nerf, I think that players overrate it, and that's a controversial statement because people love their Moonlight Greatsword. But, you know, you got to go with what you feel. You can't cater your opinion to public opinion, because if I did, you know, it'd be kind of like always buy into the hype. So, anyway, counters to these builds are, you know, Magic Shield and just the predictability of the builds. You're going to know what they're using. Very rarely does anyone throw a spell that's, you know, not predictable and not sort of the common everybody uses these spells kind of thing. So, I mean, you know, to a point everything's predictable. I mean, the PvP is not so diverse that you're going to see things shocking very often, but it's definitely Magic is sort of a, almost, I want to say, predictable. Oh, I hate these guys. A pretty predictable, these undead, these kamikaze undead. You see, I see the counter hit, swing, miss my mace, and the enemy hits me, and it takes off like maybe a third of my life, and then I wind up getting killed by the chip damage on my shield there. I should have just taken the hit or rolled away. You know, that was one of those cowardice makes waste. So, anyway, of course, we've cut back to being alive, and unfortunately, they're running R1 on the one-handed mace. Swings right over him, which is kind of a drag. These guys, man. This is kind of one of the bigger letdowns of the Lost Bastille is these kamikaze dudes, suicidal undead, and I'll talk about why they're such a letdown a little bit later. You'll also see, by the way, I'm wearing the Saint's Hood at this point. Saint's Hood, as well as the, Hexer Hood from the Hex set, is some of the best hoods in the game, because they add, you know, an extra cast to things in your inventory. When you're using things like, you know, Sunlight Spear and Forbidden Sun from Pyromancy and things like that, things that are only balanced by how few casts of them you get, it can be, you know, really overpowering for the quality of your build. So that's something to think about if you're going to be using casts, particularly of high-end casts. Like, I think Forbidden Sun is the prime example. Wearing a Hexer or a Saint's Hood based on your character is, you know, pretty solid choice all around. So, as I was saying, countering Magic, get comfortable rolling, get comfortable being aggressive. The Magic Shield itself is pretty good. The Defender's Shield is pretty good because it has great magic resist. You know, these are all good options. Okay, so the next thing I see probably the most is I see Hex a lot. Hex because basically once people got comfortable building Hex characters, at first not a lot of players are comfortable with Hex characters because it wasn't an understood quantifiable thing like other builds. I mean, players knew coming into Dark Souls 2, you know, how Intelligence build was going to work, how Faith build was going to work. It was going to be, you know, 40 to 50 points in your damage stat more than likely, and then spread the stats out for the weapon you want, and then, you know, the rest is HP dump / endurance. You know, it wasn't hard to make a template Faith character. It wasn't hard to make a template sorcery character, but people didn't really know how the hex scaling was going to work or how to make a hex character. So here's a timeline moment here for the Wanderer set. You probably wouldn't wear it very often. It's not that great, but it looks cool, I think, so it's an option for a lot of characters. So once people understood hex characters and they realized how powerful hex are, I mean, to me, hex builds are probably the best PvE builds. I mean, magic is really good, and as is faith. I mean, all the magic options are really strong. The only thing that isn't that strong for PvE is the no magic setups. But sort of like, so the thing that makes hex builds so good is great resonant soul. Like hexes, you get a lot of casts per equip, and some of the hexes, the problem is they take a lot of slots to use, but you don't necessarily need a lot. I mean, Great Resonant Soul will take you through most fights in the game, so it's definitely a strong choice. And the nice thing about hexes are I think they're generally stronger than sorcery in PvE, in PvP both. Magic might be a little more accessible for players and something they're more comfortable with, but I think players that are really good with hexes will meet with more success than players with magic. And that basically all comes down to a wider variety of weapons, so you're a little less predictable. I mean, you can only use the Moonlight Greatsword against so many players before the community's just used to fighting against it. Whereas hex, I see all sorts of stuff. With dark infused and dark weapon, and all sorts of weird stuff, and that's pretty interesting to me, at least. I'm afraid he's going to blow up the barrels. Then he slashes me off, kind of a troll. But things I see frequently, or at least semi-frequently with hex, because like I said, I see a ton of hex stuff, is unfortunately the most common hex weapon I see is, Dark Infused Moonlight Greatsword. People just can't get enough of that weapon. Other than that, I see the Crypt Greatsword a lot because it's got dark damage on it. It's already a dark weapon. It's pretty good. And I think it's... I think the problem with the Crypt Greatsword is it's so slow and so predictable that it's not going to be so great against a lot of players, at least in my experience. I mean, I've never personally used it, but I've never struggled against it. But it does put out a lot of damage, and that makes it a great PvE weapon. And it makes it fun to use. The bigger weapons are kind of flashy and cute and enjoyable, and I think that's why a lot of people are drawn to strength builds and stuff like that. And I got confused by this message here. I was like, is there a hidden wall here? I remember there being a hidden wall here. And there is, but you have to use a lockstone on it there, and it unlocks a shortcut down to Sinner's Rise and the boss down under Sinner's Rise. So I was kind of confused by that. I was like, wait, is there hidden walls in here that I never knew about? Because the game's still new enough that I'm willing to entertain the fact there's been rooms I haven't seen yet or things like that. And I have the official guide and I've consulted it before, but the guide's been known to miss things on occasion. So that's why I spend so much time wandering in circles in this room, as I thought there was more here than there really was. My apologies for that. But so Crypt Greatsword, I see that all the time. Moonlight Greatsword I see more than anything else. I see the Ruler Sword a lot. I think people have finally caught on to the fact the Ruler Sword is arguably one of the best weapons in the game for most builds. I mean, Dark Infused Ruler Sword, that's a pretty serious weapon. I mean, I find it to be arguably one of the best weapons in the game, and a great balance between PvE and PvP. Some of the things that are great for PvE aren't always good for PvP in terms of weapon category. I mean, I think that the Crypt Greatsword, like we talked earlier, was great for PvE. I mean, highly recommend. For PvP, I advise players to stay away from it just because it is so predictable, and it is sort of backstab punish city. And I see Gravelords. It's not Gravelord, excuse me. The Grave Sickle. Sorry, the exact name is eluding me right now. I'll fix it in the description. But anyway, the Sickle I think is probably the best dark weapon actually, because it's relatively fast, does plenty of damage, and that's always the thing, is you don't always need massive damage per hit if you've got a good solid attack speed and a good moveset. And I think the Sickle sort of embodies everything that you'd want in a PvP weapon. Obviously the Ruler Sword has a lot more range, which is great, and basically anything in those weapons is, very viable. And of course, the Chaos Blade is very popular with Dark Infusion because of the running pokes. And I gotta tell you, it's too bad that the validity of a lot of weapons in PvP is defined by their phantom range, which, is a terminology for, the range you see on screen versus the range it actually has due to lag and network delay. I mean, so, the Chaos Blade has so much poke range. Like, its running poke on that thing, the phantom range on that is surreal. If you see somebody running at you with that, it's usually better to start blocking or start rolling before they even attack, because, man, that thing has so much range, it's pretty sick. And the next thing I see more than anything else is probably Faith builds. This is the one I'm most experienced with. I've used Faith a little more than Sorcery, and Faith builds kind of come in a variety of weapons that all have the same premise. Boatloads of lightning damage. I see the Thorned Greatsword the most. I think that's because it's, once again, kind of a Faith version of a Moonlight Greatsword. You know, you get a throwable attack. It's not nearly as good as the Moonlight Greatsword, but it's a solid weapon, and I enjoy it in PvP. You know, I would use it. I have been known to use it, but I definitely think there's better options out there. But it is common, so if you play into PvP and you see Faith people, get used to run into it a lot. The Thorned Greatsword. Watch out for the R2, which of course throws a lightning bolt. The thing that makes it so scary is the R2 on it actually can attack you before it throws. So like, if you're in melee combat and he lands the R2 on you, he might just spam the R2 and actually hit you with the windup of throwing the lightning, then hit you with the lightning both, and that just does a colossal amount of damage. Easily avoided, predictable, but, you know, like anything else, when you get caught and you get mixed up or confused, just tremendous amount of damage, so helps with that weapon's viability. Lightning Infused Claymore is very popular. Good range, moveset's okay. A little slower in this game than in some of the other iterations of the weapon in the other previous Soul games, so not a weapon I would recommend. I'd rather use like a Mastodon Greatsword, and that's another thing you see a lot is like Mastodon Greatsword, because Faith build's going to come in two varieties, the boatloads of strength and then the minimal amount of strength. Minimal amount of strength is usually enough to use, you know, Thorned Greatsword or Defender's Greatsword, and boatloads is normally a Mastodon Greatsword, so all weapons you want to see. Most Faith weapons are large and hard-hitting, but not always. The Mace has caught on. People have realized how strong the Mace is in terms of poise damage and speed and things like that in PvP. So you'll see, you know, Lightning Mace a lot, Lightning Infused Mace, which is what I'm using right now on this character. You'll see Lightning Heyday or Hilday Longsword quite a bit, because it has pre-existing lightning and it's easy to acquire, and people like to put Sunlight Blade on it. You know, most of this stuff is going to get buffed by Sunlight Blade. You'll see Defender's Greatsword a lot, which, you know, kind of oddly enough, it sits between two polar opposites, where half the community seems to think it's, you know, OP and the best Faith weapon ever, but not really. It actually has lower AR than a lot of other weapons. It's just, what's nice about it is in my opinion, I mean, I think that the Defender's Greatsword is probably your best bet to get reliable lightning damage, and it's just tons and tons of lightning damage. You've got, I think it's an A or an S in lightning scaling. It's the highest scaling lightning weapon, so if you have, you know, 40 to 50 Faith, you're talking a lot of lightning damage. Theoretically, a little less than a, you know, like a Mastodon Greatsword with lightning weapon, but, or Sunlight Blade, but Thorned Greatsword can buff itself and has a great moveset. It's a long weapon with a fast attack speed. I mean, you know, personally, but that's my pick for best Faith weapon is, you know, Defender's Greatsword, but, you know, to each their own. Everybody's got their own thing, and, you know, that's just my thing. But anyway, that's kind of my rundown on the Faith thing. I think with beating Faith builds, there's really no trick to them. Lightning Spears are easy to dodge. If you get hit by a Sunlight Spear, you're probably dead. And, oh no, I fell. I would argue that probably the best way to beat Faith builds is just to be familiar with the tricks they can do and the things they will do. And most importantly, the Greater Magic Barrier will sometimes drastically reduce a lot of your damage, which is a quick aside I want to talk about, kind of relates to that, is so in Dark Souls 2 it's actually possible to become completely immune to an elemental attack. Unfortunately, you need 1,000 resistance to the element, so basically winds up warping your whole character around getting immunity to that element, and then using Greater Magic Barrier to get all the way up to 1,000. So there's videos of people testing it and demonstrating on YouTube. It's pretty cute, it's fascinating. I think it's far from game breaking, and I don't think it's going to impact the PvP community that much. I mean, then again, I don't PvP competitively, so maybe in fight clubs it'll be a thing to counter popular builds, but either way, I think it's fascinating that you can truly become immune to an element, which could make certain boss fights interesting / fun. You know, like Smelter Demon, you could probably get immune to fire, and that'd make a big dent in him, although unfortunately it'd still have that boatloads of physical damage. So timeline moment up ahead, we're approaching the end of this zone, and up ahead is Straids. He is a vendor that lets you trade boss souls for certain weapons and equipment. He sells pyromancies, miracles, he sells a whole bunch of different spells. He's my favorite NPC in the game, and I don't know what FromSoft was thinking, but he's currently petrified there in the corner, and there's a bonfire right beside him. Like many vendors, there's a bonfire near him so you can get back to them to do business quickly. which personally I think is a great decision. I mean, I think having to walk far to reach vendors is moronic. But the thing that makes this stupid is once you unpetrify him, he of course can die to enemy attacks, and they spawn him with these kamikaze guys that sometimes randomly just flop the ground when you're not even up there and get him killed. So it becomes the point where going to Straids from this bonfire up ahead, it's kind of a gamble. It's almost safer to go to the previous bonfire and run up to him, which only takes a minute or two, but I just think it's pretty disappointing and definitely lame that they would make that a thing in their game. A thing that can just screw you so easily is we're going to put an NPC right by enemies that self-destruct in huge AoEs. It's just not a great decision. So Straids, of course, is an extremely cocky NPC. I guess it's because he's very old and very powerful, theoretically. It's not that hard to kill if you decide to aggress him. Well, no need to, though. His set he's wearing is pretty awesome and actually a pretty great light set. You can get a hold of it by trading him 4 boss souls for anything he has, and most of his boss stuff I don't see a lot of players using or being interested in, so you kind of just wind up farming 4 things for the set and some novelty items typically. So, kind of approaching the end of the video here, and I want to cover the rest of the weapon types before we run out of time, but I have not personally encountered it, but I know raw weapons are a thing, where when you make a weapon raw, it increases the damage of the weapon, it removes all the scaling. So certain weapons that have crap scaling, raw is a great option for them. And I see bandit daggers do it a lot. Raw bandit dagger is actually a pretty viable weapon. People can really make anything they want raw. Basically, you wind up gouging, HP a lot. And I think raw would actually probably be a quote-unquote viable thing, but because Soul Man removed actual soul brackets, I think players just wind up, if they're scrimped for points, they just kind of cheat and go over the soft 125 cap, the soft 150 cap, or they just level all the way to 800 and be, Havel's wearing super mages. Which unfortunately is the thing that's more common, I'd like to admit, is people just with max soul level, 99 and everything, rolling around with, full Havel set and throwing all the magic and swinging all the huge weapons with maximum damage. It's really makes it kind of boring, but I've kind of talked this whole soul memory thing to the ground, so it'd either go away with the patch or it won't, but I think that's what holds raw back as an archetype. But I think it's something more people should experiment with. I think that, if you're committed to staying at soul level 150, which I think a lot of dedicated PvPers are, that could be a thing. You could probably make a raw build and playing around and it would be worth doing. So the last build I see is common, but less common than everything else, but still common enough that if I go PvPing for a couple hours, I expect to run into it, and that is the mundane build, which borders between overpowered or just good. And mundane is a set of scaling where once you make a weapon mundane, it'll scale to your lowest stat, and essentially mundane builds have to take every stat to a minimum of 20 because that's kind of the soft cap for mundane scaling. So if everything's at 20, you're guaranteed to get the 20 scaling, and you get a lot of damage on a mundane weapon. And this is a good way to get a lot of damage on weapons that don't really scale very well, like primarily the Santier Spear is the best example of that. So it's kind of like raw, only where raw is like you make a weapon raw to not have to build around the weapon. Santier's or mundane is kind of like raw, only you plan around it and you make a huge thing out of it. So the thing about mundane is weapons that have junk scaling or no scaling, it kind of messes up their balance. So if you want to be like non-magic, you basically have to go mundane because you can turn weapons that you basically make weapons OP essentially by planning a whole character around them. The problem is since you have 20 and everything, at that point you could use magic anyway if you really wanted to. So once again, it goes back to my thing where there's just really no reason to do pure melee in this game, which is a huge letdown. And I'll probably do another upload where I share my thoughts and maybe actually give you guys some numbers. I know there'll be some skeptics out there that say there's a lot of reasons to do pure melee that aren't just flavor. And I'm like, not really. And I have the numbers to prove it. I just haven't really prepared them for this video. But anyway, we're wrapping up the Bastile here, and we're going to grab some of the hidden items you can reach. None of them are that exciting, frankly, but they're here, and it's kind of fun to come get them. Definitely on your first character, just to run around and grab all the things you don't really need just to have gotten them. And I try to get them over and over so I can eventually memorize where all the drop locations are to make future uploads to the YouTubes easier. And the two things people use on a mundane are, there's a variety of weapons. You can do anything mundane, but overwhelmingly you're going to be seeing Santier Spear users True Santir Spear, of course, and Evelyn. And Evelyn is, of course, a favorite from Dark Souls 1, you know, the 3-shot crossbow. But, man, when you make that thing mundane, you know, if you dual-wield Evelyns, which is what most people do with them, if they're wearing Evelyns, they'll dual-wield them, make them both mundane, and with the scaling they're going to get from the mundane, you know, dual Evelyn, if you get dual full barrage, you'll either be dead or very close to dead, and fast reload, fast firing, I mean, dual Evelyn basically cheeses the entirety of the game. I mean, I can't say enough about how strong mundane is for the PvE. I think it's even better than magic in a lot of ways. It's just so consistent, so reliable, you know. With dual Evelyn, you can just spray all the bosses down with arrows, and most of them will die before they even get an attack off. It's disappointing, really, and you also get a huge access to, you know, any kind of bolt you want for the Evelyn. So if you've got the souls for it, which you will, you can go get, you know, a crap load of lightning arrows for people that are weak to lightning and things like that. And I mean, Evelyn mundane is arguably worth nerfing. I don't really think it's worth nerfing for the PvP, because I think in PvP you can block, avoid. Evelyn's not a huge problem, but I think in PvE, Evelyn is a huge problem. It basically just completely cheeses bosses. But I guess we can't nerf that until we nerf Soul Geyser a little bit. You know, I think there's precedent here to nerf Evelyn a little bit. But then again, you know, at what point do you be careful with these nerf hammers? Because once you start nerfing that, I mean, to do a mundane character, you have to take 20 into every stat, and then you do, you know, extra points here and there for flavor, and you wind up with, you know, sort of a jack of all trades character, master of none, and that's fine, but it's not like you're going to have lots of HP or anything like that. So if you start nerfing the weapons that make mundane worth doing, which is essentially Santir Spear and Evelyn, people will use other things like, you know, Crypt Greatsword, I mean, or not Crypt Great, I'm sorry, Drake's Sword. I mean, you'll see Drake's Sword on pretty much any build, because the moveset's good and the range is good. I mean, what more could you ask for? So we've got to be careful with these ban hammers, but I definitely think that Evelyn and mundane definitely cheeses all of the PvP and PvE. And PvP, though, it's just pure cheese, where, you know, if someone's prepared for it, it might not work. Whereas in PvE, the monster's never prepared for cheese. I mean, cheese always works in Souls games. You know, cheese always works in any single-player game. So, got to be really careful with nerfing, but you also be careful about the balance and the difficulty. Thankfully, making a mundane build / getting, you know, the equipment to make mundane OP, you know, unless you know where the items are and you're intentionally power rushing to them, you get them all late game, and, you know, most players don't know about mundane, so I don't think it's going to affect the casual player. But I think for returning players who are just looking to power through, you know, maybe they just got the PC edition, they just want to quickly beat the PC edition to say that they did, you know, mundane will do the work for you. So, yeah, that's one thing I'd like to ask in the comment section. If people give me feedback on mundane, if they think it's OP for PvP, PvE, you know, what are their thoughts on mundane? I mean, obviously, I think it's OP for PvE. I don't think it's OP for PvP, and that's my thoughts for mundane. It is a huge commitment for a build, though, guys. I'd like to reiterate. I mean, you have to get 20 in every stat, and then spread what's left of your stats before your artificial level cap, you know, for flavor wherever you like. And that's a pretty big commitment as a character, and sometimes you wind up having to build a completely different character to respec into it, which, once again, not a problem for veterans, not necessarily the most viable character design for new players. I would advise new players actually stay away from mundane. I think it's more of an advanced players kind of build. It's pretty cool how these guys come jumping down to attack, though. I enjoy that. Kind of like, I don't know, almost like commando, high skill. I mean, not really, but, you know. So, last couple minutes of the video, I'd like to thank everyone for watching. Please give me some feedback on this video and my videos, the new audio settings. I'd like to hear what you guys think. And lastly, genuinely interested. Let me know what you guys think of mundane, because, you know, it's something I've been talking to a lot of people on the forums. It's one of the topics I still find interesting. The soul memory thing, for example, is a sore subject and all talked out, right? So, anyway, I'd like to thank everyone for watching, and I'll see everyone next time.